Monkey is brought to you by Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects.
Hi and welcome to Quilt Monkey. In the last show we talked about building up our low volume fabric stash, and we auditioned a load of fabrics to make this pillow. So I'm hoping that what you have been doing in the week since I saw you is cutting out all of your curved pieces. You went away, you got yourself some templates, you've cut your squares, you've cut your drunkard's path, and you are now ready to tackle those curves with me. I've got myself a cup of tea because that always helps when I'm going to go on a mission to sew some curves, and we are going to tackle these together. Just having a bit of tea. Right, curves. Now you've cut all of your pieces out, and now you need to pin them together. And the key to a nice, accurate curve really is, it starts with your pinning. It starts with your pinning, and then it goes on with, taking things slow and just not rushing. So take a quarter circle, fold it in half, and just finger press. You don't need to use an iron, just finger press. You just want to get a nice crease to find the center point in your curve. Do the same with the arch. Little finger press, and open that out, and you've got a nice center point marked nice and clearly. You're going to lay your arch piece on top of your quarter circle. Some people work the other way round and have the quarter circle on top of the arch. Personally, I find it easier to sew this way, to sew with the bigger curve, the bigger piece of fabric underneath. And I don't know, I think a lot of it is personal preference, but for me, I find that I can ease my curve in better and sew more accurately if I've got the arch on the top. You're going to take a pin and just pop it in on that center point there. You're going to excuse the fact that I desperately need a manicure and also a haircut, but next time you see me I'll be beautifully groomed. I promise I won't be. And then once you've popped it in the center, match up your end, and you want to make sure that these two edges match, and pop a pin in there. Do the same around at the other end. This is kind of fiddly, but once you get into it, it kind of comes quite easily. It just takes a little bit of practice. Now I'm left-handed, so for me it's easier to work with my left hand and push the pins in that way, so the balls of my pins are facing inwards. If you are right-handed, you might find it easier to have the balls out. Also, as you're sewing, if you're right-handed, it's easier for you to then pull your pins out as you go. For me, being a lefty, it's easier for me to pull my pins out from that way. So balls in for me, maybe balls out for you. You can stop pinning with just the three if you like. If you're confident, then you can just have either edge and the center pinned. But personally, especially if this is your first time of sewing curves, I would suggest you cannot have too many pins. You want to kind of make it look a little bit like a hedgehog and as many pins in as possible. So you're going to take the center, and obviously because these two pieces are different sizes, you're going to have to kind of ease the curve. And pop a pin in, and then do the same with the other center, like that. And pop another pin in. And then just carry on Add in a couple more pins on either side so you've got plenty of pins. So there's not going to be any shifting between those two layers, and that is the key to make sure that you are in control of the two layers of fabric, that the layers of fabric aren't competing with you and battling and trying to get away, and you end up with puckers, or you end up with one side that is longer than the other. You don't want that. You want everything to be nice and even, so the more pins you add, the less likely you are of getting puckers, of having problems. So pin the heck out of your curves. What you also find, ironically, is that the bigger the curve, actually the easier it is to work with. So if you've seen, for example, the Denise Schmidt pattern single girl quilt, and it's a big block with a big curve, and you think, I don't want to try that, that looks really scary. Actually, the bigger the curve, the easier it is. You've got more room to kind of ease in as you're going. It's these smaller ones that are tricky. So if you can combat these little drunkard's paths, then you can combat any size. So I'm going to pin together all of my pieces now. The more that you pin together, the more that you can do at once. And this is a great thing for chain piecing, because once you've got into that rhythm, you can just work through your blocks kind of much easier than stopping and starting and going back and pinning, stopping and starting, going back and pinning. So pin as many of your blocks as you can face, and I shall then meet you back at the sewing machine. Right, now we're at the sewing machine and we're going to sew some curves. This is the scary part. This is the bit that you think, oh, I can't do, and it's horrible. But if we take it slowly, we've already pinned the life out of our blocks. Take things slowly and everything will be okay, honestly. To start off, you need your needle in the needle down position. You're going to sew with normal stitch length and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And with your needle in the needle down position and taking everything nice and slowly, you're going to end up with a nice smooth seam and a nice smooth curve. Take your block, pop it underneath the foot, and make sure that your first edge is matching. Foot down, needle down, and set off slowly. As you go, what we're going to do is stop and start and just kind of readjust the fabric, because it's going to try and pucker. As you're sewing, it's going to shift about a little bit, and as you remove the pins, things are going to try and pucker up. So as you sew, you're kind of flattening, smoothing and easing your curve at the same time. You want to sew at this kind of speed, nice and slow. Pull your pins out as you go, and every time you feel that it's just puckering up a little bit, just lift your foot, readjust, give it a wiggle and smooth out that little lump or bump as you go. You don't want to speed through it. As you become more confident, you can get a little bit quicker, but it's not a case of speeding through to make sure that they're all done really quickly, because the quicker you sew, the more mistakes you're going to make and the more puckers you're going to end up with. And whilst you can iron out some of the puckers, you can't iron them all out. So I'm almost at the first end. And this bit is where it kind of gets the most trickiest. So you might have a little bit that wants to pucker up a little bit more than anywhere else. But just carry on taking it slowly and getting to that first end. And you can lift your needle up, pull it out and snip your thread. And you've got a nice smooth curve. You're not going to do any pressing until you've got all of your blocks sewn. So because this is a great way to chain piece, what I do is I just carry on. So I don't cut my connecting threads until I've sewn all of my blocks together. So I just start on the next one, carry on, needle in the needle down position, taking things nice and slow, and just easing that curve as I'm going round. Stopping when I feel that there's a little bit of a pucker coming, taking out my pins. Don't sew over your pins, it will just knacker your sewing machine, it will break a needle, it will cause arguments and tears with your sewing machine. You don't want to fall out with your sewing machine. And you definitely don't want to fall out with the man that services your sewing machine. You want to be friends with him. There we go. And again, this last little bit is the trickiest bit because you just come into the end and that's where it likes to wriggle around and pucker up a little bit more than anywhere else. Just persevere, take it slowly, this speed the whole time. So I'm going to carry on with the rest of these and I'll meet you back over at the cutting table in a few minutes. So you've got all of your quarter circles sewn and now you need to lay them out into full circle blocks. So you haven't pressed your seams yet because we're going to do that at this stage when it comes to the sewing together of the full circle. So at the moment they're like this. You're going to arrange all of the quarters together so that you've got a nice mix of fabrics, a nice mix of colours and prints, and lay them out like that. Then flip them over, and you can do this at your pressing station or your ironing board, and press your seams so that they go in alternating directions. So out, then in, then out, then in, and that way your seams are going to nest together nicely and you're going to end up with a better, more even circle. So you want to pair them up and just feel for that seam, feel for it nesting together, and pop a pin in, just there, right in that seam, and then again one at the bottom. And you can sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance down there. Same with the bottom too. Match up that seam first, and feel for it. Pop a pin in and then another one at the end. You want to concentrate on making sure that those seams are nesting rather than the edges meeting. And again, sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance down there, then open them out, press each half in alternating directions again so that the seams will nest in the same way, and then match up across the middle your seams, each of the 3 seams, one at either end and one in the middle, and again sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to give you this, the finished full circle block. So it's nice and neat and even, everything is matched up perfectly. You've not got any kind of weird wonky circle going on, and your seams are nice and flat on the back. Once we've done that, we're going to lay out the rest of the squares that go with our blocks, and we're going to decide how you want your pillow to look. Okay then, I've got all of my squares and my circle blocks laid out, and I've got it so that I've got 6 squares by 6 squares. What I've done is I've kind of not thought about it and just laid all of my squares down, because if you think too much about it, you're going to be there all day and forever, and it's just going to be too much. So the easiest way is just to lay down your blocks, lay down your squares to fit around them, and once you've done that, take a step back and go, right, okay, is there anything that is screaming at me that needs moving? And you can see that I've got these two right next to each other and these two right next to each other. So I'm going to move these like so. And then I'll move this one. I think I'll move that down there and swap it with that one. And now I think I'm pretty happy with that layout. Nothing is shouting at me, nothing is too close together, nothing is too bunched up in one place. It all looks pretty even and nicely matched. You could, of course, say that there's too much white in that corner, or there's too much pink just down here. And you could find fault forever and ever and ever. So once you've found it and it's relatively pleasing and nothing is shouting at you, nothing immediately when you stand back or you squint at it, nothing is shouting, look, this is awful, these two are far too close together, or this is, looks a complete mess, then go with it. Don't beat yourself up about too many fabrics that are not perfectly matched, like the white in the corner or the pink down here, because once it's all sewn together, once it's quilted, you're not going to notice them. Nobody else is going to notice them apart from you. I'm happy with that layout, and once I've got that, I can then separate in my mind the blocks, because the pillow can't be sewn together in rows because we made the circle blocks first. If you were more confident with curves, you could sew your curves together first and then just piece everything together in rows. That makes it easier for your piecing, but we wanted to concentrate on making sure that those circles were spot on. So it's a good idea to do those first, especially if you're not confident with the curves. So I'm visualising 4 blocks, 4 quarters of the pillow. And what I'm going to do is sew them together 1 quarter at a time. And 3 of the quarters are pretty much the same. What we're going to do is sew these 2 together at the bottom and then sew that to the bottom of this block. And once we've done that, sew these 3 together and sew that to the side of the block. It's a good idea to do each of these one at a time. So just either work next to your sewing machine or rearrange each block as you go on a separate mat or on a pressing board or next to your sewing machine, so you can just pick it up, move it, sew it together and then place it back when it's finished. So each of these is basically the same, but they're just oriented different. So this one is 2 squares together, that will go at the top, and then 3 down the side again. And this one, 2 together at the top, 3 down the side again. The only one that is slightly different is this corner here, which is just a basic 9 patch. So sew the 3, 3, 3, and do this one last. So you can pay attention to the way that your seams are sitting with the other blocks. Once you've done that, sew each of the quarters together as you would a 4 patch and give it a good press and your pillow top is all done. I'm going to go start sewing my blocks together now and show you my finished pillow top. There we have it. My pillow top is all sewn together, all pressed, all done, and it's just ready to layer with some batting and lining or backing fabric, basting and quilting. Baste it really well. I like to add a basting pin at every square, so it's nice and kind of over basted, really. You can finish it off with some quilting. With this one, I drew some straight lines in a diagonal crosshatch and just quilted like that. It's nice and simple, it's quick, and I think it gives a really nice effect on squares and also on circles. You quilt it however you like, obviously. Then I added just a simple envelope back, which we've covered before, and I bound it like a quilt. Nice and simple, nice and big, but also what I think is this would make a lovely quilt in itself. So to make this big block multiple times and have a really pretty, low volume, scrappy quilt for my bed. If someone would like to make it for me, because I don't have any time. That would be lovely. And there you have it, all done. So I hope that you enjoyed sewing curves. I hope that you weren't too afraid of my hideous lack of manicure or the need for my haircut. And I will see you next time, a much better groomed quilt monkey.